This is the inside of the carriage of the Rivet 608. This is the bottom where the pinion for the rack goes through from the back, and on the front there's the pinion there which does the power cross feed. There are two screws in the rivet. The one that goes along here is a fully threaded one, and there's a half nut that goes in the square cut in the side there, and there's a series of gears that have to be fitted in. So if I just pop these in one after the other. It's a bit of a snug fit, that one. This gear here has an engagement on the back here with the clutch. So that goes in, drops into there, and then on here there's the bevel gear, and I had to replace this gear here, which the original one was absolutely totally toast, and I got a replacement gear, and the one on the back of the replacement gear wasn't any good either, so that's why I had to replace it completely. This is a replacement bevel gear because the original one was real mess, and this is the crown wheel. Right, you have to make absolutely certain that all the gears revolve nice and smoothly and there's no friction in either direction, which there isn't. And then on this side, into this hole here, there goes the clutch arrangement. And the clutch is very unusual because you press down on here to engage it, and the lathe, when it's operational, has a lever that presses in the end of that stud, and there's a spring on the bottom, and it expands the shoe inside here. So when you're advancing the carriage up the lathe, there's quite a lot of drag from this, even though it's not engaged. And that's with the cover in place, and just to show the position for that gear. And you'll notice that there are some bushings in some of these studs where I've had extreme wear and had to replace them. And the stud that operates the clutch is this one here, and that has a lever across the top, which I'll fit later and show you how that operates. So everything is a very tight fit. There's studs pins that locate the plate, and it doesn't come off any too easily. But that's a good sign, not a bad one. Anyway, that's it fitted in place. I've now mounted the carriage on the lathe bed, and I'm just about to complete fitting all the external parts. It has to be extremely well fit, all the gears have to be extremely well fitting, nothing too tight, otherwise it will not turn over properly. So you can turn it by hand just to check to make sure that there aren't any gears that are failing to mesh properly, and that seems to be pretty good. And I was just turning it over just by hand at the end here. Now looking at this, this is the gear that drives the cross feed, and in this square is where the half nut goes, and this is the half nut, literally just a half nut on 2 links, and that fits inside that little box there. And the half nut moves in and out by moving this lever here, and I'll show that operating a little bit later on. The next job I had to do was to fit new wipers in the 2 grooves on the underside of here, on where it fits on the top of the bed. And these 2 holes here are the oil holes, so that you can squirt oil directly on top of the bearing surface. And this goes on top of here, like that, making sure that the wipers are nice and bedded in. And that's it. I'm just going to get some bolts. One interesting part of the lathe is that at the back of the saddle or carriage there's this plate here which goes down behind a machine surface on the back. Right, now I've screwed back onto the rear of the saddle this plate here, and there are 3 screws that secure it. And you can probably just make out that there's a gib plate there, and there's a little gap between the gib and this cast iron part here, and there's 3 small adjusting screws in the back. It is now adjusted up tight, so I've got the bed sitting, the saddle sitting on top of the bed, nice and snug. Everything else is set up right, the gib's set up right, so the next thing now is to just check that the thing moves from end to end of the lathe without any problem. Not too stiff. And then if I engage the full gear train, I can still move it reasonably easily. So that should be very, very accurate now, hopefully. Right, that's finished. This is the mechanism that moves the half nut in and out. So if I move this up rather, you can just see that brass block in there moves in and out on an eccentric cam. Very simple, and it works fine. The other interesting part is this lever that comes across the front, and that is designed so that when it's engaged you can't move the half nut to engage it, because it releases the stud for the clutch. So if I just move that back again with this little lever underneath, I can engage the half nut again. Right, that's that. Another very nice feature of this lathe, and it's unique, is the mechanism for engaging the drive. You just pull this lever back and it clicks, and to stop it you press that down and that stops it. So That engages the clutch by pressing down on there, and that releases it. And as I mentioned before, when you go into using the half nut, this slides along and prevents you from pushing that in. And then the depth stop is here. And what happens here is it engages with a hole in here, so effectively what it's doing then is it pushes down on this plate when it goes into the hole and switches the drive off. Very neat mechanism, and everything, as you can see, is hand finished and hand engineered. Really more of a gun mechanism than a lathe mechanism. The remaining part I've got to put on yet are the wipers, which go into holes in here, and there's a plate at this end and a plate at the far end, and they're I've discovered cork rather than felt, and they just press up against the front face. So that's my next job, and when that's done, that's almost then ready to think about testing. Now I'm going to fit on the gearbox, which is a very easy thing to do. Just has 2 bolts that holds it on. First one in. Okay, that's all fitted and working. Just the 2 bolts. I've replaced all of the nuts with levers, which just makes it look a bit better. Slightly fiddlier to get together though, but once it's done it looks good. And this contains the reversing gear under here. And rivets are very fond of having things on sliding shafts. There's a sliding shaft gear there, there's a sliding shaft gear there, and there's another one under there. And the last thing to do now is to fit the cross slide and top slide. The lever here moves a little shield across, revealing the gear underneath, which does the power feed. So this goes on like that. You can just check that the gear is engaging in the right spot, and then lock it in position with a little lever underneath, and that's that done. And the remaining one item, oh, 2 items, is the dial thread indicator, which is a very nicely engineered piece which goes in the rear of the carriage, and my tool post, which is here. And that's it. Ready to start doing some machining, some testing first and then some machining.